Greetings, all power to the people. My name is Virginia Harris. I'm a member of Black August Los Angeles, and I want to welcome everyone here tonight with us for the commemoration of the Attica Rebellion, which happened 49 years ago on September 9th, 1971. It lasted 4 days until September 13th, 1971. 39 people were slaughtered in the retaking of the prison by the state troopers of New York, guards and prisoners. Hundreds of people were injured and maimed and tortured. Attica did not happen in a vacuum. In the late 60s and early 70s, we saw the March on Washington, the murders of John F. Kennedy, the killings of the Mississippi freedom fighters, the killings of Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., and Malcolm X. There were inner city rebellions across the country in response to the assassinations of Malcolm and Martin. There were prison and jail uprisings from Auburn, New York to Folsom in California, demanding a change in the crowded conditions, correcting the poor quality of food, poor sanitation, inadequate medical care. There were demonstrations in the streets against the US involvement in Vietnam. And that was the backdrop that Attica was situated within. At Attica, prisoners were allowed 1 shower a week and 1 roll of toilet paper every month. Can you imagine that? So you had to count each square of toilet paper. It's insane. Almost 2,500 prisoners were housed in a dilapidated facility that was built for only 1,600. They worked, earning 40 cents a day, making mattresses, license plates, and shoes. Attica was a giant keg of dynamite. It's just ripe for detonation. The McKay Commission, which wrote the report on the events at Attica, stated, with the exception of Indian massacres in the late 19th century, the state police assault, which ended the 4-day prison uprising, was the bloodiest one-day encounter between Americans since the Civil War. I would like to add, however, that it was not between Americans, since the state unleashed a deadly assault against unarmed men. It was not a fair fight at all. This evening we are going to revisit those times, talk more about what led to the Attica Rebellion, its aftermath, the rise of mass incarceration, and what we can do. The program features Assemblyperson Charles Barron, member of the New York State Assembly. Assemblyperson Barron was a young community activist and Black Panther Party member when the Attica Rebellion occurred, and will share his experiences with us. We will also share videos and still photos from the uprising and poetry written by Attica prisoners. We hope to refresh your memory and to spark your interest in the plight of the 2.5 million of our neighbors, friends, and family members who are languishing behind bars in this country. Our program begins with libations, where we honor our ancestors. Please welcome Mzuri, member of Black August Los Angeles and the All African People's Revolutionary Party. Mzuri will lead us in libations. Mzuri.
Revolutionary greetings. We are African people. We are an African people, so when we honor our ancestors, we want to be amongst them. They are everywhere. So we're going to honor them outside. So you may hear bells, you may hear waterfalls, you may hear planes from the prison industrial complex and the military industrial complex, but know that our ancestors are here. I'll open up by making a call to the ancestors. Para suayo, oh moñara cuana mapaqueña era we. Para suayo, oh moñara cuana mapaqueña era we. Oh para suayo, que oh chudara. Oh moñara cuana mapaqueña era we. We call on that first ancestor, which is a twin ancestor, because we know all creation happens with the divine man and woman, the divine male and female, the divine feminine and masculine energy. So we call on that first ancestor who, by many names, we honor today. And you can answer in Ago, Ashe. If you can, hopefully you're standing and you are remembering our ancestors today. So we call on those first ancestors of creation who created the world, who created the universe that we know of, the universe that we live in, that provides air and water, that provides oxygen and nutrients and all the planets. To that first ancestor, we say Ashe. We honor those first ancestors of creation, those ancestors that were created to populate the earth. We know that the first place that man and woman were found, where life was found, was Africa. And so we honor those first ancestors that made their way through the continent, that populated the continent and began growing and developing language and customs and traditions. To those first ancestors, we say Ashe. We honor those ancestors who began to move the Ka and the Ba, those ancestors that over 100,000 years traveled from the south up through the north, that followed the Nile Valley path, that began to form tools and traditions, customs and institutions, that developed language, that developed societies, that developed community. And those ancestors gave us the first elements of the institutions that we now continue to practice. To those first ancestors, the Ka and the Ba, we say Ashe. To those ancestors that began to develop what we call empires, what we call those nation states, those ancestors that began to unify. We've been always in unity. Those ancestors who began to develop libraries, medicine, architecture, that studied the stars, that built pyramids from Zimbabwe all the way to Kemet, that built institutions not only in the University of Sankore, but those institutions in Timbuktu, the universities and the libraries of Alexandria. Those ancestors, we want to thank them for their work and their dedication, because they gave us what we needed to become the great African people that we were, to build institutions that the world came to study from. To those ancestors, we say Ashe. We want to give remembrance to those ancestors that when they came upon the foreigners that came to our continent, that came to travel, to begin to study and to observe our way of life. Those foreigners that came with ill intention to take, to steal, to rob, that our ancestors began to resist. Don't let them believe that our ancestors in whole gave us away. Our ancestors fought. We have a history of resistance. To those ancestors, we want to say Ashe. We want to give honor and praise to those ancestors who, as they began to find themselves defeated in certain areas, and they began to have to be forced and trekked across hundreds of miles to get to the ports where those Europeans enslaved us. They murdered us. They kidnapped us. They took us across waters so that they could use our labor, so they could exploit our bodies, our mind, and our culture. Those ancestors resisted. Many of those ancestors jumped off the ship. Many of those ancestors chose to die on the ships. Many of those ancestors took their lives before they got on the ship. Those ancestors resisted in all forms. Many of them even killing their shipmasters. For those ancestors and that spirit of resistance that crossed the waters to all places where we are today, we say Ashe. We want to remember those ancestors who arrived to ports all across the world in over 125 countries where we landed, where we had to labor, where we were auctioned on the auction block, where we were sold like animals and treated like animals. But those ancestors stood still. They stood tall. They stood in reverence of who they were, knowing who they were, and many resisted. To those ancestors who became the maroons, who fought and killed, to those ancestors that, a part of the Haitian Revolution, created the first African revolution outside of the African continent that was victorious in Haiti, that stood up, women and men and children that fought for their liberation, to those ancestors who fought in all territories, in all the islands, in all the territories of the United Snakes, in those territories that are even in Africa, to those ancestors of resistance, we say Ashe. We want to give honor and reverence to those ancestors who, after victory, continued to build, and even after defeat, continued to resist. To those ancestors, we want to honor them and recognize the work that they did, because even after the struggle, they never stopped fighting. And even as they began to build, our enemies began to build institutions, prisons after Reconstruction, after colonialism. They began to build ways in which they can continue to exploit our labor. Our people continue to resist. And even with the building of the industrial complex, we know, which is just another form of slavery, our people continue to resist. And today we honor many of those militants that come from the historical legacy of the resistance of the Maroons, that come from that historical legacy of Haiti. Those brothers in Attica, those brothers in Soledad, those brothers in all these locked down imperialist prisons that have resisted, we want to honor them today, and we want to remember them always. We say Ashe. And as we name each ancestor, repeat them, and remember not to ever forget them, so that our children and our children's children and our children's children's children can know that this world is filled with our blood. But in fact, we will drench that soil and create new life and new struggle. To those ancestors, William Allen, we pour Ashe. Elliot Barkley, we pour Ashe. John Barnes, we pour Ashe. Edward Cunningham, we pour Ashe. John D'Angelo, we pour Ashe. Bernard Davis, we pour Ashe. Alan Durham, we pour Ashe. William Fuller, we pour Ashe. Melvin Gray, we pour Ashe. Elmer Hardy, we pour Ashe. Robert Hennigan, we pour Ashe. Kenneth Hess, we pour Ashe. Thomas Hicks, we pour Ashe. Emmanuel Johnson, we pour Ashe. Herbert Jones, we pour Ashe. Richard Lewis, we pour Ashe. Charles Lundy, we pour Ashe. Kenneth Malloy, we pour Ashe. Goodell Martin, we pour Ashe. William McKinney, we pour Ashe. Lorenzo McNeil, we pour Ashe. Samuel Melville, we pour Ashe. Edward Menifee, we pour Ashe. Jose Metayo, or Mentejo, we pour Ashe. Million Manyweather, we pour Ashe. John Metzaloni, we pour Ashe. Richard Moore, we pour Ashe. Carlos Prescott, we pour Ashe. Michael Privatera, we pour, Ashe. William Quinn, we pour, Ashe. Raymond Rivera, we pour, Ashe. James Robinson, we pour, Ashe. Santiago Santos, we pour, Ashe. Barry Schwartz, we pour, Ashe. Harold Thomas, we pour, Ashe. Carl Valone, we pour, Ashe. Rafael Vasquez, we pour, Ashe. Melvin Ware, we pour, Ashe. Roland Weiner, we pour, Ashe. Willie West, we pour, Ashe. Harrison Whelan, we pour, Ashe. Alfred Williams, we pour, Ashe. And for all those who were wounded, maimed, tortured, and scarred, we pour, Ashe, Ashe, Ashe. And so we remember, Ashe.
Thank you. Wow, thank you, Mzuri. That was probably one of the most moving libations I have witnessed. I am not much of a crying person, but it sure did bring tears up into the wells of my eyes. Our next speaker is Assemblyperson Charles Barron. As I mentioned, Assemblyperson Barron was a young Black Panther Party member in the party's Harlem chapter at the time of the Attica Uprising. After the Panther Party, he graduated college and became Chief of Staff for the Reverend Dr. Herbert Daughtry's National Black United Front. He later became CEO of the Dynamics of Leadership Corporation and traveled the country giving seminars and workshops on leadership development. He was elected to the New York City Council, and after 12 years on the City Council, which was 3 4-year terms, he was elected to the New York State Assembly. I have left out a lot of details between all those extraordinary positions and will let Assemblyperson Barron fill in the blanks. Welcome, Assemblyperson Barron.
Thank you so much. And I just want to say all power to the people all the time and forever. And for those of us who are still alive and have gone through the 60s and still around here in the 21st century, just remember this: our struggle may be long, but our victory is certain. I want to start this off by saying that, I joined the Black Panther Party in 1968. I was 18 years old. On October 7th this year, I'll be 70. So I spent about a good 52 years in this struggle. And as an 18-year-old, brother by the name of Mark Holder and another brother by the name of Tony Martin. I lived on the Lower East Side of Manhattan in the Lillian Wall projects. They called it Alphabet City. And they used to come down, the Panthers. I was organizing in my community down there. We would argue and debate. They said, come up to Harlem and see what we're doing. So at the invitation of Mark Holder and Tony Martin, I went up to the Harlem branch and I saw how they were feeding breakfast to children and free clothing. And I signed up. I would collect my papers and bring them down to the Lower East Side where I did most of my work. But I was able to also meet with Felipe Luisiano and Richie Perez from the Young Lords on the Lower East Side. And then there was an Asian group called the Iwar-Kin or the Iwar-Chin in Chinatown. And they were like the Asian revolutionaries and had an identical party to the Black Panther Party. But it was in 1971. That was probably one of the most depressing days of my life when the Attica Rebellion took place, because remember, it took place in September, but right in August, George Jackson was killed. He was shot and killed in a prison by a prison guard. He was murdered. So George Jackson, who in 1961, I believe it was arrested for $70 robbery. And he spent they gave him 1 year to life for a $70 robbery. And he was able to revolutionize himself. He met a Black Panther in the prison, and they together in 1966 started the Black Guerrilla Family, the Black Guerrilla Family. And so George revolutionized himself, and he became one of the most popular revolutionaries in prison, along with the Soledad brothers, Fleta Drumgo and John McCutcheon, Cluchette, rather, they became some of the most powerful revolutionary brothers in prison. So that's the Attica backdrop, is when George was killed. But before George was killed in 1970, his brother, Jonathan Jackson, who was just 17 years old, went into Marin County and said, hey, I come to liberate the brothers and sisters that was on trial at that time, James McLean and Ruchell McGee and Brother William Christmas. So he came in, sat in court for a while, opened up his coat. He was heavily armed. He had gotten weapons from Angela Davis, and they tied a shotgun to the judge's neck, and they attempted to leave the prison, and they did. They got out, and the police opened fire, and Jonathan, at 17, was killed. And then so was William Christmas, but Ruchell McGee, he survived that, and I believe he may still be around. But see, these are the times that I grew up in. Those were prior to all the other assassinations of Malcolm and Martin, as those events really inflamed the inmates in Attica. And all of us, many of our people were in prison because of the prison industrial complex and the 13th Amendment, which did not abolish slavery. We went from the plantation to the penitentiary because it said slavery shall be abolished except as a punishment for crime. So the prison industrial complex became our new homes. And in these prisons at that time, it's just we were treated as animals, like that, worse than dogs. I mean, talking about not being able to shower, not having enough soap, or showering infrequently, and food was horrible. And so all of the brothers at Attica, they were saying, hey, we're not animals, we're human beings, we're men. And I'd rather stand up and fight on my feet for my manhood. And if I die doing that, so be it. So what were they asking for? They weren't even asking for liberation. They were asking for prison reforms. Matter of fact, they had asked for these things prior, and they peaceful methods of trying to get it just was totally ignored. Or they would say, yeah, we're going to do this, and never do it. And then all over the country, people, our brothers, were dying in prison. They were being murdered in prison, and bodies were showing up in prisons that people couldn't explain, along with George Jackson's body in August, and Attica Rebellion took place in September. In August, when George died, they had a whole George Jackson Day at Attica Prison. And so they all was really honoring, and it frightened the prison guards there, because they all decided they wouldn't say a word. Can you imagine thousands of prisons walking through the prison and not uttering a word in honor of George Jackson? That was the climate that was going on. The Black Panthers, for me, it was very depressing because it was 1971. George had gotten murdered in August, and the Black Panther Party had a lot of internal dynamics. I didn't know what was going to go on there. East Coast, West Coast dynamics, Huey Eldridge dynamics. So I'm going through all of that as a young man. Then Attica hits, and it was just one of the most depressing days of my life. But I responded. We organized some things on the Lower East Side. They organized marches in Harlem, in support of Attica. And then, of course, we went to a lot of Free Angela Davis rallies. I remember a bunch of those, and some of us were a little disappointed when she came out and went with the Communist Party, but so be it. And then there was the Panther 21 case around that time as well, where Fannie Shakur, who I became very close friends with later on, years later, and she did a magnificent defense of the Panther 21 at 100 Center Street. We used to go to those rallies and pack the courts, and they were eventually freed. And Fannie was pregnant with Tupac at that time. And I became very close friends with later on in life with Tupac and Setua and Fannie. and Gloria, the whole family. But Attica, yeah, I'll never forget. I'll never forget the brothers that were just asking for fundamental human things. They want education, a right to have their political views, a right to religious freedom, better living conditions. They wanted to make a decent wage, a living wage. Don't be ripping us off, because the town of Attica, it counted on the prison economy. It had a prison economy. Most of the guards and all of that in prison, they were making good money and benefits and all of that. So it was beneficial for them to have, and they just treated them like animals. So they rose up. They were making the demands. They had all kinds of people coming in to negotiate with them. Bobby Seale, they asked for. William Kunstler came in there, and Arthur Eve, the Assemblyman Arthur Eve came in, because one of the brothers, leaders that was murdered in Attica, was from Rochester. So Arthur Eve came in. Herman Badillo came in, and all kinds of folk were coming in to trying to negotiate and tell Nelson Rockefeller, you got to listen. Why don't you just come in and hear what they're asking for? They're only asking for some basic human things. And for that, they decided that they were not going to negotiate anymore, even after they gave them their 28 demands. All of them were reasonable, and nothing was unreasonable. And anything that they felt was unreasonable, they said, fine, we'll deal with that some other time, but let's at least do this. So they attacked with superior weapons. They even had the Tommy machine guns and pump action 12 gauge shotguns, and the inmates didn't have anything, and to attack and shoot, and didn't even care if they killed their own people just to kill us, and then lied, said that the hostages slit throats of the 9 hostages had their throats cut, and then the media ran with that, only to find out after the autopsies that all 40 people, 31 inmates and 9 hostages, died from state gunfire, state bullets. And they use those dum-dum bullets, the hollow point bullets, that once they enter you, they travel all over your body to make sure that there'll be a lot of destruction of your organs. That was Attica, and it was about prison reform. You know, I find it interesting that when we fight for basic human needs, wasn't even talking revolution, even though there were some radical revolutionary folk, but they were talking about basic human needs, and it resulted to that. And it also reminded me, around that time in 1968, John Carlos and Tommy Smith, all they did was lift their fist up to the American flag at the Olympics, and they were ostracized, couldn't find a job. John Collins's wife eventually did harm to herself, you know. So, you know, when you think of these things and our struggling during that time, Black Panther, civil rights, you know, the Vietnam War was going on, Attica, the murder of George Jackson and Jonathan Jackson, little Bobby Hutton, 16, 17-year-old first Black Panther to be killed in the shootout with police. So that was the climate, that was the atmosphere. And we weren't talking just about reform. We were calling for radical systemic change. We were calling for revolution. We were connecting with international forces and reading revolutionary literature, from Mao Tse-tung's Little Red Book to Axioms of Kwame Nkrumah, revolutionary leader of Ghana. We were reading some Marxist material, and we were studying Fidel Castro and Che Guevara, Thomas Sankara, you know, all of these, Patrice Lumumba, Sekou Touré, you know, all of these great revolutionary leaders in Africa and Asia and in Latin America, and studying all of that to see how can we apply this to America. But we find in America that we're in a very unique position. There's no revolution in the world that you can compare to our condition here in America. No revolution in the world can compare. So when we look at the revolutions in Africa, they knew that was their land, they had some language, and they were the majority in each country. They just had to get the colonialists out and then get the neo-colonial black sellout puppets out. Same thing in Latin America and same thing in the Caribbean. But when it came to Africans here in America, these white folk in America didn't feel they were Europeans. They are Americans, and they're not going anywhere. It's 323 million Americans, and at best, if we add black and brown people, we're maybe 100 million, 120 million, but there's still 200 million of some other folk up here in America. So as we move ever so swiftly in the 21st century, the best way we can honor the uprising in Attica, the best way we can honor the Haitian Revolution and all of the resistance during the enslavement of Africans from the rebellions and uprisings, Nat Turner, Harriet Tubman, the best way we can honor that is not to be sellout black neo-colonial puppets of a Democratic Party, and not to be sellouts to materialism, not to be egoistic and it's all about just you. I think the best way we can honor them is that in this 21st century, during these radical times, when people are demonstrating historically across the world and highlighting, protesting the death of black people at the hands of the police, the best way to honor that now is to take all of that motion, all of that mobilizing around issues to organizing for power. Power is the great equalizer. I don't care whether you hate me or not. I don't care about your racism, long as you don't have no power to do nothing to me. Long as I have the power, as the first point of the Black Panther Party said, point one, we want power to determine the destiny of the black community and oppressed communities. We want the power to control all of the institutions in our communities that control our lives. So on that wise, here in the 21st century, that's why I got into the electoral arena, and that's why we started an organization in my beloved East New York called Operation Power. And what we did is we ran radicals, myself and my wife, Inez Barron, in the local elected arena seats. In the local elected seats, we ran and won. We beat the sellout puppets of the Democratic Party using the Democratic primary as a strategy, as a tactic. So we won those seats. Our biggest enemy is the Black Democrats who sell us out to Governor Cuomo, who sell us out to Mayor de Blasio and to speakers. And no matter how many blacks you get in power positions, if they're not radical and conscious, black visibility doesn't mean black power. And we're suffering from a form of domestic neo-colonialism by having these black puppets in these positions to doing the bidding. You can even have a black president, and they still want to indict people for killing us. Look what happened under Obama. Tamir Rice happened under Obama. Michael Brown and Ferguson under Obama. Trayvon Martin under Obama. All of this happened with a black attorney general, Eric Holder, a black attorney general, and no one's indicted. The only thing he does about police brutality is when his friend Skip Gates, another neo-colonial intellectual puppet, Skip Gates gets roughed up or invaded his home by a police officer, and they have beer at the White House. So I'm saying that we got to turn mobilizing into organizing for power. On the local level, we need to take these city council seats, these state assembly seats, like the Black Panther Party was going for. Bobby Seale ran for mayor of Oakland, along with Elaine Brown, who ran for the city council. We need to continue that and get black revolutionaries, black radicals elected to the local positions. And some of you may get upset with me for this, but I really don't care. I am not voting for Biden or Kamala Harris. I am not Trumpetized. You know, I know everybody got to stop Trump. He's a fascist. America is fascism, always has been. How well were you doing under Obama? How well were you doing under Clinton? How well were you doing under Jimmy Carter? We need to focus on local politics. And by the way, you've never voted for president in your life because you can't. The Electoral College picks the president. When you vote for whomever you're going to vote for in New York, you're voting for the electors of New York, who you don't know who they are, and they go in November to vote for president. So I'm writing in reparations now. That's my candidate. And they'll say, well, if you do that, that's like voting for Trump. That's like giving it to Trump. That is ignorant. Of course it isn't. New York State is going to be won by Biden and Harris because it is a blue state. No matter how I vote, they are winning New York State. So vote your conscience. No more lesser of two evils. No more we got to stop Trump so much that you don't want to start anybody else supporting a black agenda. So they said, would you vote for Biden and Harris? I said, no. I put it this way. Yes, if they say they're anti-capitalism, they help us dismantle the capitalist system and place it with a more humane, socialistic, communalistic, and African community, yes. If they say that we will fight to give black community control over all of its institutions, especially the police, got my vote. If they say they're supporting free healthcare, got my vote. If they say they're supporting free education, got my vote. If they say they're supporting to dismantle the police departments and not defund, dismantle them, reimagine, reorganize policing, and have it done in a very radical different way, they got my vote. If they abolish the prison system, not reform it, abolish it, reimagine, reorganizing how you're going to deal with crime and imprisonment, or if at all. So I'm not rejecting them, they're rejecting me because they're not supporting any of that. So I'm writing in reparations now. There's only about 4, 5, 6, 7 battleground states that make a difference. Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Florida, a few other states where that's going to be where it's decided. So we need to get local. All politics is local. Let's get some local power. Let's stay revolutionary. We have to fight and plant the seed of revolution in the minds of our people as we take the local seats to meet their material needs. We stopped gentrification in my district because we had the power to. Developers have to get us to sign off on it. We said no, not until the housing meets the income of our community. We were able to build 3 new schools in my district, 4 parks, over $21 million in my district, a youth center, $12 million in my district, a new library in my district, Black Male Initiative in CUNY, $2.5 million for the last 10 years in my district, in the city University of New York. This is what Black revolutionaries are going to do. I have a reparations bill that has 45 sponsors on it already, and we want to get that rolling. And I got the Black, Latino, and Asian caucus in the state assembly to write a letter of support for Herman Bell, and he was released. I'm not saying that was because of the letter, but I will say this, he was not released. Prior to that, over 40-something years, we did the letter for Herman Bell. He was released. We did a letter for Seth Hayes. He was released because I started a political prisoner and reparations committee. And now we're working to get Jalil Montague out. He's coming up in September, and he's coming up also again in October if September doesn't work. And Tish James should be ashamed of herself, the Attorney General, who, after a white judge said he should be released because of the COVID situation, she appealed it on behalf of her boss, the one who she's a puppet for, in my opinion, and he doesn't have no problem showing the strings. And she won on appeal, and now Jalil was kept in prison, and he did get the virus. He's doing better now, but let's hope and pray that he gets out. So I say all power to the people. Revolution is inevitable. Our struggle may be long, but our victory is certain. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And the African proverb says the best way to eat a big elephant is one bite at a time. Let's take a bite out of capitalism. Thank you.
Thank you. That was dynamic. I love it. Thank you, Assemblyperson Barron. You tied together everything, the murder of George and Jonathan Jackson, the current election drive and the dilemma that people are facing as far as the lesser of two evils, which both of the parties are evil, as you mentioned. So I appreciate you telling people to vote their conscience, and I hope that people do. We have a short video clip. The video clip is featuring L.D. Barkley. L.D. Barkley was one of the spokespersons for the prisoner group, the Attica Prisoners Group, and he is giving a brief statement to the press. And LD was one of the people that was murdered in the retaking of the prison. So we'll watch that video clip and then we'll go on with the program. Thank you.
We are men. We are not beasts, and we do not intend to be driven or beaten as such. The entire prison populace has set forth to change forever the ruthless brutalization and disregard for the lives of the prisoners here and throughout the United States. What has happened here is but the sound before the fury of those who are oppressed.
So the sound before the fury of the oppressed. The odds were stacked against these men in Attica. Absolutely. They were, as Assemblymember Barron said, they were unarmed. They were completely unarmed when the state troopers stormed the prison with Thompson submachine guns, shotguns, handguns, some of their own private weapons from their homes. They took off their badges so that they wouldn't be identified. If that doesn't ring a bell with us currently, how the police are rounding up people at the various demonstrations without badges on, without identification, so that they cannot be identified. It's the cycle of rebellion in this country, the cycle of resistance, and we're back in that cycle. So they made their demands to the prison administration. They presented them. They hoped that these demands would be presented to Nelson Rockefeller. Nelson Rockefeller and Richard Nixon were on the phone with each other, and Nelson Rockefeller decided that he was not going to acquiesce. He felt that if he did, that would open a can of worms, and that would mean that throughout the country, prisoners would get their rights. Nixon said that he would support whatever Rockefeller did, and so Rockefeller's answer to the demands of the prisoners of Attica was bullets and tear gas. So, as we mentioned, there were demands. In July, they made a set of demands, and then they made another set of demands during the rebellion. Black August Los Angeles member Assata Umoja is going to read the list of demands to us now. Assata? You're muted.
Okay, I'm sorry. Good evening. Number one, we demand the constitutional rights of legal representation at the time of all parole board hearings, the protection from the procedure of the parole authorities whereby they permit no procedural safeguards, such as an attorney for cross-examination of witnesses in behalf of the parolee at the parole revocation hearings. Number two, we demand a change in medical staff and medical policy and procedure. The Attica Prison Hospital is totally inadequate, understaffed, and prejudiced in the treatment of inmates. There are numerous mistakes made. Many times improper, erroneous medication is given by untrained personnel. We also demand periodical checkups on all prisoners and sufficient licensed practitioners 24 hours a day instead of inmates' help that is now used. We demand adequate visiting. Number three, we demand adequate visiting conditions and facilities for the inmate and families of prisoners. The visiting facilities at the prison are such as to preclude adequate visiting for inmates and their families. Number four, we demand an end to the segregation of prisoners from the mainline population because of their political beliefs. Some of the men in segregation units are confined there solely for political reasons, and their segregation from other inmates is indefinite. Number 5, an end to the persecution and punishment of prisoners who practice their constitutional right of peaceful dissent. Prisoners of Attica and other New York prisons cannot be compelled to work, as these prisons were built for the purpose of housing prisoners, and there is no mention to the prisoners being required to work on prison jobs in order to remain in the mainline population and be considered for release. Many prisoners believe their labor power is being exploited in order for the state to increase economic power and to continue the demand of its correctional industries, which are million-dollar complexes, yet do not develop working skills acceptable for employment outside society, which do not pay the prisoner more than an average of 40 cents a day. Most prisoners never make more than 50 cents a day. Prisoners who refuse to work for the outrageous scale or who strike are punished and segregated without access to the privileges shared by those who work. And this is class legislation, class division, and creates hostilities within the prison. Number 6, we demand an end to political persecution, racial persecution, and the denial of prisoners' rights to subscribe to political papers, books, and any other educational and current media chronicles that are forwarded through the U.S. mail. Number 7, we demand that industries be allowed to enter institutions and employ inmates to work 8 hours a day and fit into the category of workers for scale wages. The working conditions in prisons do not develop working incentives parallel to the many jobs in the outside society. A paroled prisoner faces many contradictions of the job that add to his difficulty in adjusting. Those industries outside who desire to enter prisons should be allowed to enter for the purpose of employment placement. Number 8, we demand that inmates be granted the right to join or form labor unions. Number 9, we demand that inmates be granted the right to support their own families. At present, thousands of family recipients have to divide their checks, welfare recipients have to divide their checks with their imprisoned relatives, who without outside support cannot even buy toilet articles of food. Men working on scale wages could not support themselves and their families while in prison. Number 10, we demand that correctional officers be prosecuted as a matter of law for any act of cruel and unusual punishment where it is not a matter of life or death. Number 11, we demand that all institutions using inmate labor be made to conform within the state and federal minimum wage laws. Number 12, we demand an end to the escalating practice of physical brutality being perpetrated upon inmates of New York State prisons. Number 13, we demand the appointment of 3 lawyers from the New York State Bar Association to full-time positions for the provision of legal assistance to inmates seeking post-conviction relief and to act as liaisons between the administration and inmates, bringing inmate complaints to the attention of the administration. Number 14, we demand that the updating of industry working condition standards provided under New York state law. Number 15, we demand the establishment of inmate worker insurance plan to provide compensation for work-related accidents. Number 16, we demand the establishment of unionized vocational training programs comparable to that of federal prisons systems, which provide for union instructions, union pay scales, and union membership upon completion of vocational training courses. Number 17, we demand annual accounting of the inmates' recreational fund and formulation of an inmate communities to give inmates a voice as to how such funds were used. Number 18, we demand that the present parole board appointed by the governor be eradicated and replaced by the parole board elected by popular vote of the people in a world where many crimes are punished by indeterminate sentences which authority acts with secrecy and within vast discretion, and given heavy weight to accusations of by prison employees against inmates. Inmates feel trapped unless they are willing to abandon their desire to be independent men. Number 19, we demand that the state legislature create a full-time salaried board of overseers by the state prison. The board would be responsible for evaluating allegations by inmates, their families, friends, lawyers against employers charged with acting inhumanely, illegally, or unreasonably. The board should include people nominated by a psychiatric association, by the Bar Association, State Bar Association, by the Civil Liberties Union, and by groups concerned, involved laymen. Number 20, we demand an end to allegations of race relations, prison administration, agitation. We demand an end to agitation of race relations by the prison administration in the state. Number 21, we demand that the Department of Corrections furnish all prisoners with services of ethnic counselors that need special services of the brown and black population in this prison. Number 22, we demand an end to the discrimination of the judgment of quota and parole for black and brown people. Number 23, we demand that all prisoners at the time their cells and property are being searched by correctional officers of state prison be present when they're being searched. Number 24, we demand an end to the discrimination against prisoners when they appear before the parole board. Most prisoners are denied parole solely because of their past records. Life sentences should not confine a man longer than 10 years, as 7 years is considered the statute for a lifetime out of circulation. And if a man cannot be rehabilitated after a maximum of 10 years of constructive programs, etc., then he belongs in a mental hygiene center, not a prison. Number 25, we demand that better food be served to inmates. The food is gastronomical disaster. We also demand that drinking water be placed on each table, and that each inmate be allowed to take as much food as he wants and as much bread as he wants, instead of the severely limited portions and limited 4 slices of bread. Inmates wishing a pork-free diet should have one, and since 85% of our diet is pork meat and pork saturated food. Number 26, we demand an end to the unsanitary conditions that exist in the mess hall. Example, dirty trays, dirty utensils, stained drinking cups, an end to the practice of putting food on the tables hours before eating time without any protective covering on it. Number 27, we demand that there will be one set of rules governing all prisons in this state, instead of the present system where each warden makes rules for his institution as he sees fit. There is a number 28. We were not able to locate it. If anybody knows what number 28 is, we would love to hear it. But there were a total of 28 demands that were made, and those are them. Thank you.
Thank you, Assata. And as everyone can see from the demands that Assata read, they were reasonable demands that should have been granted. The lesson that Governor Nelson Rockefeller wanted to teach and that the prison administration wanted to teach was that you cannot rise up against us. However, the prisoners did, and they stood their ground. They risked their lives and their lives were taken. But the end result was that most of the 28 demands were eventually granted. We have a video clip from Eyes on the Prize, which some of you may be familiar with that program, that shows the rebellion and the retaking of the prison. However, our program is running a little bit over. So I want to go ahead and show the video clip, and then I might restructure the remainder of the program a little bit. So this is a video clip from Eyes on the Prize, and it shows the retaking of the prison after the uprising. It might be difficult for some people to watch.
Blacks filled the nation's prisons in disproportionate numbers. At Attica Correctional Facility in upstate New York, they comprised more than 60% of the inmate population. Most came from poor inner-city neighborhoods.
Conditions in 1971, before the rebellion, was bad. You know, bad food, bad educational programs, very, very low wages. We were called slave wages. You know, myself, I was working in laundry, and I was making like 30 cents a day, being the warden's laundry boy, and that was the title that you had with my job, warden's boy. And I'm far from a boy.
One of the most impassioned voices to emerge was George Jackson's. His published letters from prison had reached a wide audience. On August 21st, 1971, Jackson was shot to death in San Quentin Prison in California. At Attica, the news of his death greatly affected the inmates.
When it really hit me, it's going to breakfast that morning. Everybody was quiet. Nobody wasn't picking up no silverware. You know, when you go in the dining room in the mess hall, you had to pick up a knife, spoon, and fork. And when you come out, you had to have that. Nobody was picking up. Nobody was talking.
3 weeks later, a fight between inmates and guards at Attica sparked a prison-wide uprising. Violence swept through the institution.
The general chaos was such that even I was taken aback, because you had 40 or 50 correction officers who no longer, it appeared, had control of the institution. So order had to be made out of this disorder. And at that point, the Muslim contingent in the yard, I think there were 35 Muslim brothers, saw to it that there was no further injuries to the hostages.
The newly established inmate leadership released 11 injured guards, but still held hostage 39 prison employees. Commissioner of Corrections Russell Oswald agreed to negotiate. Accompanied by advisors and a local television crew, he entered the yard where 1,200 inmates were in control. The news team was permitted to talk to the hostages.
Been treated all right?
Yes, I have so far. I've been treated very good.
No complaints, but no problem.
The meeting with Commissioner Oswald quickly focused on inmate fear of reprisals for the rebellion.
I talked as rationally as I could with them and listened to them for some period of time. And ultimately, they said they had an agenda of what they wanted. And I said, well, give me the agenda.
The agenda included demands for improved conditions, magazines, adequate health care, and hiring of Black and Spanish-speaking guards. Distrustful of state officials, the inmates also asked for outsiders to observe negotiations. The inmates requested 13 observers.
I felt good. You know, I felt relieved. I felt, I guess, liberated. You know, that I didn't have to worry about the bar in the front of me, even though I knew that I felt and knew that I was in prison. Now, that's the reality. But that visible thing wasn't there no more. You know, the walls was there, but that bar wasn't really in the front of me, that visible bar. It was more invisible then.
The next morning, Commissioner Oswald returned to the yard, still seeking a negotiated solution to the crisis.
I talked with the governor's legal counsel yesterday, and he told me the same as Mr. Schwartz told me, and that is that the governor nor no one else has the power to grant amnesty for the commission of a crime, and that's the falls within the purview of the local law enforcement authorities.
Mr. Oswald, now, you and I know that that's a lie.
Amnesty was very important to the inmates because it, to a great degree, would determine what happened to them after the state took over, or whether or not there was going to be a peaceful kind of takeover, and subsequently how they would be treated.
The talks had reached an impasse. Tensions in the yard increased.
We have been asking for over 29 hours for food and water. We haven't got none. We're going to keep Mr. Russell G. Oswald here until we get the food and the water.
Protected by the inmate security force, Commissioner Oswald left the yard. The hopes of both sides now rested on the outside observers who arrived in Attica later that day.
We are men. We are not beasts. And we intend to be have set forth to change forever the ruthless brutalization and disregard for the lives of the prisoners here and throughout the United States. What has happened here is but the sound before the fury of those who are oppressed.
The first meeting of observers and inmates lasted almost till dawn. A public address system set up in the yard kept the 1,200 inmates informed. On Saturday, the third day of the uprising, troopers surrounding the prison yard waited for a decision by the state. Using a video camera, they recorded the activities of the inmates.
And there is the ugliest, blackest Negro gentleman I've ever seen in my life in that blackout. Boy, when they painted him dark. The man doing the speaking is wearing a bright red robe. He's just gotten several very loud responses from the crowd. Typical rabble-rouser type talk.
It was almost a community within a community. And it was somewhat very, very impressive that they'd said, this is our home and we're now going to make it as livable as possible. And there was a tremendous amount of discipline there within the yard.
Families and friends of the hostages gathered outside the prison walls, waiting for news. Relatives and supporters of the inmates demonstrated nearby. Governor Nelson Rockefeller and Commissioner Oswald had earlier agreed to most of the demands concerning prison conditions, but rebelling inmates could now face murder charges unless amnesty was granted. The next day, state troopers moved into position to retake the prison, if ordered.
We thought that the situation had reached crisis, that in fact there was about to be an attempt to retake the prison. We thought that there would be a lot of bloodshed. In fact, we said to the governor that if that happened, there would be a massacre. And his response was that basically that he sympathized with our position, felt that everything had been done that could be done, thanked us greatly for our efforts and that sort of thing. But the net effect of it was that he could not grant amnesty, and in fact said that even if I could, I wouldn't do it.
With negotiations deadlocked, inmates requested Black and Latino reporters and a member of the establishment press. It was an attempt to speak directly to the public.
Y'all dudes running around here shooting that dope. Running around here shooting that dope. Getting high, raping them sisters, them white folks, justifying it in the cause of revolution. Well, we're going to die here at Attica today or tomorrow. And we ask you to get together, get our people together, and unite.
The people in here are treated like dogs. Not only the black, the Puerto and the white. And we're going to get what we demand, or we're going to die trying.
I just hope that the commissioner and the other people in the committee that they've gathered together can come up with a solution to solve these people's problems.
Monday morning, day 5. Commissioner Oswald demanded the immediate release of the hostages. In response, the inmates positioned 8 of the hostages on the catwalk. By their side stood inmates armed with knives and clubs, threatening to kill the hostages in case of an attack.
We knew that they were going to come in, but we never knew that they were going to come in there that way. That was really a big surprise, the way that they came in the yard. We thought they were going to come in there and knock some heads and bust some heads open and that kind of way. And once we start seeing the helicopters and they start shooting the gas pellets, and I start seeing people getting opened up with shotguns, you know, then I knew that they were really coming in there in a violent, violent way.
Surrender
It's an awful scene. William Kunstler has said that people are dying in there, and I agree with that. I think that there are people who are dying in there, and the scene is I'm gonna cut this off. Helicopters are still flying overhead. It seems there was an announcement from the helicopter right above me to the inmates below that they should put their hands on their heads and come out. I don't know whether anyone has died inside. And I'm upset. It's unfortunate what has happened here. Whatever happens, after the situation here at Attica, a penal system here in the United States and the people who are kept in this out of them will never be the same.
As the inmates surrendered, they were herded into an adjacent yard.
We were made to strip, lay in the mud, face down, and crawl to a guard 10 to 20 feet away from the guard that had you stripped. At that point, that guard would mark an X with white chalk on the back of select inmates, who were then removed from the mud physically by 2 additional guards, placed in a line to run a gauntlet of correction officers to be beaten all the way to another cell block.
You know, you gotta let me explain it this way. You know, it was very, very barbaric, you know, very, very cruel, you know, and I really feel it. You know, what they really did, you know, they ripped our clothes off. They made us crawl on the ground like we were animals, you know, and they snatched me and they laid me on the table, you know, and they beat me in my testicles and they burned me with cigarettes and they dropped hot shells on me and they put a football up under my throat and they kept telling me that if it dropped, they was gonna kill me. And I really felt, you know, after seeing so many people shot for no apparent reason, that we really were gonna do this.
Armed rebellion of the type we have faced threatens the destruction of our free society. We cannot permit that destruction to happen. It has indeed been an agonizing decision.
39 men were killed in the assault, 29 inmates and 10 hostages. Among the dead, inmate leader Elliot Barkley. 89 men were seriously wounded. Hostage Michael Smith was shot 4 times in the abdomen. 3 inmates were found stabbed to death, killed earlier by other prisoners. Initial reports by state officials that the hostages had died of slashed throats were refuted by the medical examiner.
The first 8 autopsies were on the cases identified to us as hostages. All 8 cases died of gunshot wounds.
The medical examiner's finding was significant. The inmates had no firearms. Gunfire by state troopers and prison guards was responsible for all the deaths during the retaking of the prison.
What did you do during those moments when the assault was actually taking place, the order had been given?
Well, I kept in touch by phone, and I'll never forget the moment when the report was given that 14 guards had come out alive, and while I was on the phone with Bobby Douglas, he said, now it's 15, now it's 16, now it's 17. He said, now 18, and we went up to 21. And I want to tell you, I just was absolutely overwhelmed. I just didn't see how it was possible with 1,200 men in there, armed with electrified barricades, with trenches, with a pledge, which they said that they would all go right down fighting to the last man, how it was going to be possible.
What does this tell you about the prisoners, Governor? What does this tell you about prisoners, the fact that so many men did emerge unharmed?
You're talking now about,
Well,
I think what it tells you that the use of this gas is a fantastic instrument in a situation.
Governor,
like
after that order had been given, did you pray?
Not after it, I prayed before.
In a country troubled by unrest, the call for law and order remained popular. But many wondered, was the nation well served by law enforcement used to silence voices of dissent? And was America willing to maintain order, no matter what the cost?
Harold, so the answer to the question, was America willing to maintain order no matter what the cost? The answer is yes, obviously. They went in and wantonly slaughtered people who were unarmed, even their own prison guards who were being held as hostage because they wanted to retake the prison. And the collateral damage was just that. It was collateral damage. That's a really heavy film to watch. I've watched the entire film before, and it is just unbelievable what the government will do when it is forced to make a decision about its human lives over property. The next speaker to come forward for us is a member of Black August Los Angeles. It's Harold Welton, who's going to talk to us a little more in detail about the Attica Rebellion, how it arose, its connection with George Jackson, and unjust imprisonment. Harold.
Greetings, everyone. I want to start off by saying, if you look at the governor, Nelson, who was a liberal, and you look at this president, soon to be president, Biden, you're looking at the same type of explanations for crimes that they committed. This man started talking about gas and the excellent way in which they used Biden when the question was raised about police terrorism in Black communities and brown communities. He talked about, why don't we shoot them in the legs? So I just want to draw that parallel. I'm going to be quick and fast as possible with this. I know we're running out of time. So I want to start off by talking about what Comrade George Jackson talked about in 1971. He said, toward the united front, he said, a new Unitarian progressive current has sprung up in the movement centering on political prisoners. George was uniting the movement, the revolutionary resistance outside of the prison with the revolutionary movement inside the prison, not just in California, but across the country that we just seen with the Attica documentary. I want to add that the Attica Rebellion was unique in this sense. It was not only Black resistance, it was also Puerto Rican resistance and white resistance against the murderous, brutal terrorists that murdered and assassinated people that day, September the 13th. Also, I want to talk about the fact that that rebellion was well organized. In addition to the demands that they talked about, they also had organized security to protect those hostages, those guards. Those guards were those that lived. They lived because those prisoners protected them. Had not those prisoners had any humanity, then most of those guards would have been gone, as opposed to just 10. In addition to the viciousness of the state, the viciousness of their military actions, they did not even care about the fact that they were killing their own. 10 of the guards that were killed were all killed by National Guard, New York State trooper gunfire. So this shows you the viciousness of the state, the viciousness of the military industrial complex. When they know that you have an effective movement, they will use all means to suppress that movement. Now, I was reading an article back to so-called liberals, politicians, and I think the councilman was very on point when he talked about these neo-colonialist, black and brown neo-colonialist leadership. There was an article in, I think it was Yahoo News, where Kamala, is that how you say it, Kamala Harris, asked Mr. Obama, well, tell me about Biden. Well, Mr. Obama started talking about, well, he likes ice cream and barbecue sauce noodles. Well, Kamala, why don't you ask him about the fact that while he was the president, under his drone program, he killed over 5,000 people, no trial, think of Trayvon Martin, no trial, no hearing, just execution. And out of that 5,000, at least 500 of those people that were killed around the world, drone assassinated around the world, were children. And you have a president like him who will get up and start crying crocodile tears at situations where people were killed in mass killing, where he's a killer. He's a baby killer. There's no difference between him killing babies in other parts of the world or some crazy Nazi killing people in parts of this world called the United States. So I just wanted to talk about that. In addition to the backdrop, as fast as I can say, backstory, the prison movement of that time started in January of 1970 when 3 Black New African prisoners were assassinated by a Soledad guard named O.P. Miller. O.P. Miller allegedly tried to break up a fight between Black and white prisoners. In the process, he could only find Black and New African prisoners. Those prisoners that died that day or were martyred that day were Cleveland Edwards, Alvin Miller, and W.L. Nolan. Out of that, maybe a week later, the county of Salinas had a grand jury hearing, and they absolved O.P. Miller of these killings. 3 days later, a guard in Soledad prison came up corrected or retaliation, and a note was attached to his body saying that 1 down, 3 to go. They indicted 3 Soledad prisoners for that. Comrade George Jackson. Comrade George Jackson's case, they said, well, he was the only one that could have done it. That was their major defense. In addition, Fleeta Drumgo and John Clichette. In August 1970, we heard about the Marin County slave revolt led by Jonathan Jackson, 17 years old, who were martyred by guards and San Marin County sheriffs. Jonathan was martyred. William Christmas was martyred. James McLean was martyred. And the only sole survivor was Rochelle McGee. We move into demonstrations around the country before that to support the Soledad brothers. And the face of that was the Communist Party and Angela Davis. They led a well-organized struggle to free the Soledad brothers. After Jonathan Jackson was assassinated and the rest of the comrades, Angela was captured for being a co-conspirator in that case. She allegedly supplied the weapons, allegedly, to Jonathan. She was absolved in 1972. Rochelle McGee was a co-defendant. His trial was separated from that trial. They kicked Rochelle McGee to the curb and forgot about him, left him there. He's still in prison. He's 81 years old. He's been in prison a total of 57 years, 50 years since the August 7th slave revolt. In addition, Comrade George Jackson, who was assassinated August 21st, 1971, state-sanctioned assassination. And the comrades talked about it. They talked about the fact at Attica, they talked about the fact that they had a silent protest in honor of Comrade George Jackson. And, you know, remembering back at that in those days, that was very, very uplifting and inspiring for me and comrades like myself. We were very inspired by that. And then he said three weeks later, we had the resistance of Attica. And again, you saw the viciousness, the brutal example of the whole history of these European settler colonists in the way they deal with resistance, or the way they deal with occupying a person's country, the way they deal with stealing from a person's country, the way they deal with enslaving from countries like they did African slaves for over 488 years. So I'll try to keep it, I'll stop right there. But I wanted to also say again, I agree with the councilman in supporting these neo-colonialist, remote control supporters of European supremacy and imperialism, colonialism and capitalism, like he said. Again, I'll go back to this conversation Senator Harris had with Obama. They're talking about ice cream. Well, he likes ice cream. And he also likes barbecued noodles, I believe she said. You know, and that shows you sort of, and like George Jackson called it, the American mind, or contrapositive mobilization as opposed to positive mobilization. And I understand that it's going to be a long struggle. It's not going to be a short struggle. Again, we get into this silliness perpetrated by the noise media, the public relations firm for capitalism and this ruling class in this country. So I'll end by saying, long live the fighting spirit of the comrades that fell on September 13th, and the over 1,300 prisoners that organized that rebellion. Again, those guards had not the prisoners had the type of humanity that they had, it would have been a whole lot more necks taken that day if it wasn't for the humanity of those prisoners. That's it for me.
Thank you, Harold. Wow. I wish we could sing and dance and do something a little more uplifting. This is really heavy information. But I want to bring on next Julia Wallace. Julia is a socialist revolutionary from Inglewood, California. She is a writer for the International Socialist Press, leftvoice.org, and is a rank and file member of SEIU Local 721. SEIU is the Service Employees International Union. She is active in SEIU's Drop Cop group, which seeks to disaffiliate police from the union and from the labor movement. And the quote, I think, is from Julia: "Police are not workers, they are oppressors and strike breakers." She's going to share a poem with us at this time. Julia. You're muted. You're muted. Take off your mute.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on your program. Just responding to what people have said, in a sea of capitalist parties, of Democrats and Republicans, be a Nat Turner. Revolution is always the goal, no matter who's in office, and no matter who's in office, they will attack us. So we fight for revolution, not for our next oppressor. So I'm going to be reading a poem. This is by Christopher Sutherland, who was a prisoner in Attica, and it is called 13th and Genocide. Long live the fighters in the Attica Rebellion. The clouds were low when the sun rose that day, for the white folks came to put some black brothers away. From 8 different counties, the white folks came with 1,200 locks and some brand new chains. The word was kill niggers. Kill all you can, for they don't have the right to live as men. Then up in the sky appeared a big green bird, and from inside we heard few words. Put your hands on your head and you won't get hurt. Lay on your bellies and put your face in the dirt. September 13th. Let the drums roll, give the first command that put us in the ground. Ready! We stiffen our shoulders and hold our heads up high. Let the world take note that proud Black men are about to die. Aim! If our actions cause brothers and sisters to unite, in their fighting spirits we live. So let the drums roll and the damn order put us in the ground. Fire!
Wow. Ooh, thank you, Julia. I'm going to change the remainder of the program because we have run over and don't want to keep people who are watching, especially anyone on the East Coast who's still with us, any longer than necessary. So we were going to talk about mass incarceration. And one of the things I do want to mention just about that was an interview that I saw with Kamala Harris, who was on a stage and she was talking about people who are demonstrating about the school to prison pipeline. She talked about going into a closet and getting the clothing pole, the pole that holds up the clothes, and using that to make a picket sign. And then she was kind of marching around the stage with an invisible picket sign, chanting, "More schools, less prisons, more schools, less prisons, more schools, less prisons." At the end of her chanting, she said, and I'm paraphrasing, "Theoretically, I can understand what people are saying. However, no one has been able to tell me yet, what am I supposed to do with the 3 locks on my front door?" And I thought it was surprising that she wouldn't suggest or understand that better housing, better paying jobs, better health care, and rehabilitation programs could help quell crime and could help reduce her need for locks on her front door. During the troubling times that we are in, especially with COVID-19 and how it is affecting those members of our society who are incarcerated, we should be fighting as hard as we can to get them out, particularly people who are in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. What can they do? They have little chance of recidivism, which means chance of doing some kind of crime and going back. They are going to more than likely get COVID-19 because there's no way for them to be social distanced inside the prisons. So we need to work as hard as we can to get them out. We don't want the government to turn any of their life sentences into slow, painful death sentences. So what can we do? We can write to those who are incarcerated. Black August Los Angeles has names of inmates, comrades on our Facebook calendar page. You can call or write your elected officials to free those who are at high risk of contracting COVID-19. You can demonstrate or support demonstrations at local jails and prisons, demand better conditions for those who are locked up, support re-entry programs that help those recently released have an easier integration back into the community, and finally, support the movement to close prisons and change our criminal justice system. I want to thank everybody who spoke on our program, Julia, Harold, Asada, Missouri, Assembly Member Barron. I really want to thank you for getting here and getting on with us. I want to thank all the viewers and listeners, and thank Black August Los Angeles for putting on this program. And I'm going to end on that note by saying all power to the people and free the land. The struggle continues. Thank you very much for joining us.